My apologies for my lack of eye contact this week. I will be reading my homily. It's been one of those weeks. Happens sometimes. So this gospel reading is right in line with things that people say and think all the time. Hey, Jesus, this teaching is too hard. And people who followed Jesus for a while choose to go their own way. That happens. People sometimes can only go so far before they run out of strength. But even so, Jesus welcomed everyone and always proclaimed the truth, whether it was easy or not. The gospel said it. Jesus knew that not everyone was going to see his earthly ministry through to the end. And yeah, he could have been exclusive and only worried about the people he knew would make it to the end. Or he could have watered down the message so that it challenged fewer people. But you all know that Jesus did neither of those things. He proclaimed God's truth and welcomed everyone to it. And he knew that it meant that only a small number of them would really see it through to that ultimate conclusion in the dawn of something new. And when you think of it like that, it's a very divine decision to make. Jesus' actions were not at all based on compromise or paths of least resistance. It involved all things and had room for all people, even though there wasn't really a practical way to go about it as a task or a mission. Because God doesn't always have to be practical in the ordinary sense of the word. So I just have two observations for you today. One is a bit of disciple trivia that's worth knowing, and the other applies to us today as modern disciples. So the trivia is that the wording in the gospel is absolutely correct. There were many, many disciples of Christ. Not just the guys that were at the Last Supper. Because a disciple is a follower of Jesus. That's what the word means. So technically, all the people at the feeding of the 5,000, all of them were disciples, if only for an afternoon. We tend to call the guys at the Last Supper the 12, or the 12 disciples. And then we make the vast crowd the disciples. Like I said, it's nothing critical that is disciple trivia worth knowing. And that means that we are all disciples because we're all followers of Christ. The word apostle is a little more picky. I'm going to save that for another Sunday. So, here's what this means for us. It is an act of faith to stick with something through all the way. There will always be people who would say that something is too hard or too risky and then quit. But with faith, we have the strength to go the distance and see things through. And I know it's not easy, but it's part of being a disciple of Christ. Part of being a disciple of Christ is sticking with things when the going gets rough. There was a movie I rather enjoyed a couple of years back. It's rated R, so I won't tell you the title. That's a rule. But it was about the housing market crash about a decade ago. And the first character you meet in the movie is the first guy who found out that what the banks were doing was problematic and going to lead to, a catastrophe. And he was a numbers guy. He didn't have very good social skills. And it was his job to invest money into things for the investors and the shareholders. So he discovers that the market will crash in less than 3 years. And he invests every dime of his firm into the prospect that this is going to happen within 3 years. If he's wrong, they all lose everything. And if he's right, they all become millionaires overnight. As you might expect, A lot of people were angry about this. They thought it was a ridiculous risk because remember, the housing market had never crashed before in the history of America. So they thought this was an absurd risk, and they tried to pressure him out of it. But he held on. And my favorite scene of the movie is when even his boss is fed up with him, and his boss barges into his office and starts waggling his finger at him and says, "What are you doing? Are you insane? The firm is losing $70 million a year in order to gamble on something that has never happened in the history of economics. That is what you're telling me we're doing." And he goes, yeah, that's it. You understand it perfectly. I loved it because he refused to get mad at his boss, and it was just hilarious. But that's what he said. And this is based on real events. The housing market did, in fact, crash. And there was a lot of money made for people who saw it coming and did something about it. And the connection I wanted to make with this movie and the gospel is the idea of sticking with something through thick and thin. Because in that movie, if that guy caved to the pressure, no one would have made anything. There was no 50% gamble he could have done. It was an all or nothing situation, and the only way to win was to see it through to the end, to hold out, and have faith that the truth would eventually be revealed for all people. And that's exactly what happened. Isn't that us today? Quitting is always an option in today's world. And it would seem that there are a lot of people out there who somehow thrive on the quitting attitude of others. But that's not us. That's not what we're called to. We are called to stick it out through thick and thin with faith and confidence that what we're doing is worthwhile. And it is worthwhile. It does matter. It matters a great deal, as a matter of fact. And we are all disciples through it all, as long as we continue to walk faithfully at the side of Jesus Christ.